Are there any things that you would like to me to ask you about that I haven't, that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I guess one of the things that I continue to come back to is this rather interesting model for sharing and leadership within SENCER. It just strikes me that that is so much at the core of SENCER. I think I mentioned earlier that if you were to ask me to give a definition of SENCER, I almost would have to think that it would begin with SENCER is a vibrant community. Then I would say what it does, because it seems to me that community aspect is so integral to what SENCER is that it's hard for me to think about content specific papers or articles or anything, websites or whatever, in the absence of that kind of dynamism, that kind of exchange that goes on. And it would seem to me, whether it's online, face-to-face, whatever, that that element is one that is so critical. You talk about leadership. To me, what we have seen over the period of a few days is an interesting kind of model of leadership, because it has given many people in many different situations the opportunity to demonstrate their expertise in relationship to whatever. So in a certain way, almost everybody has led, I believe, in some way. And that's part of, I think, of what SENCER is doing.
Well, I tend to think that this is a key point that those who really want to increase reform have to focus on, because merely having a good idea established and even validated through the most sophisticated evidence doesn't necessarily produce the motivational dimension
Absolutely.
that gets it to happen.
When I consider my own engagement with SENCER and why it's so important to me personally, it is the mix of what the SENCER ideals and in the context of this kind of environment. It's what keeps me engaged. Each year, because of the nature of the SENCER community, each time I return, I learn a lot. And I was thinking about that yesterday, about why is that? Well, if you bring together a number of people who have tremendous expertise, and there is an environment for a certain reciprocity, then that creates boundless opportunities for learning. I'm in many situations. I attend, of course, many conferences and institutes, etc. And I was trying to think about what's different about this environment. And one of the things that's different about this environment is that it sets high standards while at the same time it creates an atmosphere of respect. And in many instances, you go into a conference or whatever, and you're guarded. You're guarded because there is a feeling of being judged. That, am I good enough? I'm being compared to what? What I have to offer, is it really something that is significant for this particular group? And so there's a certain jockeying kind of thing that goes on. And I feel that at SENCER, that is minimized. I feel, and that is, I don't quite know exactly how that happens. I think part of the tone that you set early on with SENCER, I think that helped tremendously. You also continue to remind people, attendees, of certain kind of guiding principles for SENCER. I think that continues to help. But as I've interacted with lots of people at this institute and at previous institutes, one of the things that repeatedly comes up is that people feel like they are valued. They feel like they are learning and that they can shift roles. At one time they're the student, at another time they're the teacher, and they feel that kind of fluidity, that this is not a high pressure, that one can have high standards, without high stress related to a whole bunch of other stuff. And so it's made me think about why certain environments are so stressful that you go and you really, and in fact, I would argue, and I think the research supports that, is that when you're under such stress, you don't give your best, and you're not in a position to receive. And I think that is just critical.
You know, this year, Eliza Riley, in some of the introductory comments that she gave at our session for newcomers, because we have this, as you know, this sort of problem, because the community is so vibrant and robust that it almost seems like a cult to newcomers. They don't know quite what to do. Yeah. People are so, you know, they use phrases like drank the Kool-Aid and things like that, that actually I find, you know, a little hard to take. But what was interesting is that Eliza quoted one of our old colleagues at the AAC&U, the former president Paula Brownlee, who was a chemist, who was somebody that I knew back when she was at Douglas College at Rutgers. But she used to say about that organization that it was a community of purpose and not a community of interest.
Very interesting.
And by that she meant that it wasn't prosecuting, let's say, the particular interests of the AAU institutions or chemists or something else, but of a larger purpose of liberal learning. And I hadn't thought about that in several years since Paula said it and Eliza repeated it. But I think there's something to that about this, that people feel like they're part of some kind of purpose.
I think that's interesting.
Not a partisan purpose or a particular movement of any sort, but just to a general sense that there is something that they can do to improve learning, and that learning improvement will, you know, as we heard today, improve the GDP or some other connected kind of thing. But that is the purpose that brings them here.
That's very interesting. I was just thinking about what you were saying there in relationship to something that somebody said to me recently that stuck in my mind. The person said, I take my work seriously, but I don't take myself seriously. And so in the sense that somehow I'm about something that is broader, more significant than about the self. And it sounds like to me that's kind of what you're also saying in that way, that SENCER is about something that's broader than a particular person or institution or whatever. And when you buy into that, when you engage with that, it perhaps allows you to back away a bit from some of the individual interests, or you begin to situate the individual interest in that kind of broader.
I think the latter is closer to what I see happening. I think when I watch what happens in SENCER, I sometimes am convinced that it's bringing people back to something that was their original interest that they've gotten very far away from. You know, that it returns them to some object of desire that they had to make some, that, you know, they didn't go into physics so that they could teach in a lecture hall to no one who wanted to listen to them. I mean, and so the idea of reconnecting with that self-interest in the service of a larger interest seems to be one of the things
that's very interesting, this notion about connecting or reconnecting, because ultimately that's what people want to do. It's what faculty members want to do with students, that they're interested in the subject matter. And I can think about how excited faculty members get when a student gets connected to the subject matter so that there can be an exchange in that kind of way. And perhaps SENCER provides a context.
And we watch people work harder when they are doing, you know, that this is not easy work, as you know, right?
Yes.
Your course redesign was...
Yes. It's not easy work, but it's the same kind of thing I think that we say to students, that when you are engaged, when you see meaning, when you see purpose, then you are motivated to do whatever. And so that's why students spend hours upon hours working on something. If it's a project, particularly if it's a project that the student has defined and they're interested in the kinds of results that they get.
think on just a very little side note, a lot of people in higher education have been concerned about academic integrity, cheating, that sort of thing in students. When it seems to me it's going to be a very different thing to cheat when somebody's counting on what you do.
Absolutely. And when you are engaged with what you do, and you care about what you do, and somebody is counting on what you do, I think it puts a kind of moral obligation on one when that happens. Because I often say, what is it about the system that sort of motivates students to cheat? You know, that is, so, you know, sometimes it feels like just a game. It feels like you're just doing something for the sake of getting a piece of paper. These are the requirements that you must satisfy. And therefore, that's more important. Getting that piece of paper is more important than the engagement with learning and finding it fun and interesting and contributing to something.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.